Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 477 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our fifth book just came out. It's called Perseverance and How to Be a Great Fraternity or Sorority Alumnus. So go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, we are now in an election cycle that we'll be talking about very sensitive issues on things like abortion. I'm not here to advocate one way or the other. However, I do want voices on the show to talk about these issues and give us all sides of the issue because ultimately, your votes as college students in this election will have an impact on the future of our nation. Pastor Ray Lane was born during the Great Depression in spite of a plan to have him aborted. He grew up on a farm in Idaho and served in the U.S. Air Force. He attended Boise Junior College, which is now actually Boise State University. He was a farmer and a breeder of registered Holsteins, graduated from Nazarene Bible College in Colorado Springs, and was a pastor with his famous wife, who is an artist and a pastor, Norma, of churches in Los Alamos, New Mexico, Kuna, Idaho, Auckland First Church of the Nazarene, and Lynn in Auckland, New Zealand, also Spokane, Washington, and Santa Clara, California. In retirement, he has served as an assistant funeral director, volunteered as a Colorado Springs police chaplain, and volunteered with the San Diego's Sheriff's Department. After Norma passed away on her 76th birthday, he married Jean, a bookkeeper for the Pasadena, California School District. When single again, he met Muriel, who was a bell ringer for the Salvation Army in Miami, Florida, and finally Joyce, a retired visiting nurse that grew up in Nebraska. Jean and Muriel are also deceased. He and Norma had two children, Leah and Jeff, who passed away at the age of 59. He and Joyce now live in a retirement community in Colorado. Welcome to the show, Pastor Ray.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for welcoming me in. That guy sounds pretty good.
I would say that guy sounds pretty important, Pastor Ray. Well,
Yeah.
I tell you what, I want to talk to our audience a little bit about your upbringing because I think your story is a really interesting one and one that we need to consider when we're making choices. And, you know, when you were 8 years old, your mother actually told you that she had intended to abort you as a baby, but her doctor persuaded her not to do it. Why did she want an abortion at that time?
You got to remember, 1931 was still in the Great Depression. The Great Depression started on Black Thursday in 1928. That's 96 years ago on a Thursday. I was looking at the financial papers this morning, what was going on in the stock market. It's kind of crazy right now. And it's been 96 years since the big crash. But my parents had gotten married and had one baby. And then 6 years later, mom had two abortions between that time and the time I was coming along. And she went to the doctor and told him that she needed another abortion. And he said, well, where's your husband? Well, he's out in the old Model A waiting for me to come out again. He said, go out and see if you can get him to come in. I'd like to talk to him. So she did. My dad came in and talked to the doctor privately. You know, I often have wished that I had been in that room. I never asked my dad what was said. I wish I had. I think he would have told me maybe. But here I am, 92 years later. And thankfully, I can tell you some about my story. You've alluded to it already. It's a thing you need to realize what was going on in the Great Depression. The unemployment rate was 25%, and they had been 2 or 3 years in the Depression at the time Mom got pregnant with me. So it's understandable that they were struggling. They had already been struggling, but they were on a farm. The doctor said, you have fruit, you have a storage of canned fruit, you have meat, you have fruit, you have everything you need to eat. You're not going to starve to death. Another mouth will be okay. So they decided they'd let me come along.
Wow.
That's
Well,
that's my
I'm sure
story.
glad that, yeah, I'm sure glad that that doctor had that conversation with your parents. I think that's an important one. And I can understand. I mean, as somebody who's a parent of two children myself, I can understand the intrepidation of trying to think about how am I going to feed this kid? Do we have everything that we need in order to raise this child, including putting food on the table? Because if you don't, then you're in a bad spot.
Well, my wife that I'm married to now, she was born the same year I was in Nebraska, and they lived in a small town. They didn't have access to food like we did on the farm,
Mhm.
and she still saves rubber bands and little things like that because she didn't have it. I'm a little more liberal. I'll throw away a piece of paper once in a while, but it has affected our lives, I think, in a very positive way, though it was terrible at the start.
Yeah, yeah.
We didn't know what toilet tissue was until, at least I didn't, until I was about 6 years old. We didn't have indoor plumbing. And the Sears and Roebuck or Ward's catalog took care of the paper problem until we got a house built that had indoor plumbing.
Wow.
Anyway, it
Unbelievable.
was a tough time.
Yeah, wow, unbelievable. And I do want to say thank you for your service. You served in the U.S. Air Force. What was that experience like in the Air Force?
Well, I had never been away from home until I was drafted. I joined the Air National Guard in the 3rd of January 1951 to avoid the draft. And on the 10th of January, the unit was drafted. So I was reluctantly in the service for a 3-year Air National Guard time with 21 months of active duty. And I learned what life was like in a different context from what I'd learned on the farm. I knew a lot about how animals worked out with each other. I knew about leaders, the flock following the leader. I knew about if a chicken got bloody head, the other chickens would pick on them till they killed them. I knew a lot about animals, but the animal that I didn't know much about was humans. And I learned a lot in the service. My most dangerous activity in the service was mixing napalm for practice bombing, which was what was going on.
Mm.
Another issue that I had when I was in the service was that we had to retrain from having F-51s to F-86 jets during Korea. And I volunteered for early active duties because I had an ability to be a typer. I took typing in high school, which was rare for farm kids in those days. And I had the records. I was record keeper for all of the 400 men in our unit. And I got to know everybody because they had to come through where I had an office and talk to me. And I got acquainted with a lot of the pilots. We had over 40 pilots, and most of them died in practice. That was hard. I
Mm.
learned a little bit, I suppose, of how to deal with death.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
that was I got a ribbon for marksmanship when I did some basic training. But the fun part of the thing was I was stationed in Victorville, California, and I loved the desert. First service had been in Valdosta, Georgia. I don't know how people live where all that humidity is, But anyway, getting to Victorville, California was 830 miles from my old home. So I and several other guys would get in the car take a one-day pass, and we'd get off work on Thursday evening, and 5 o'clock we'd leave there and arrive in Boise, Idaho at 5 o'clock in the morning, and have breakfast at home with mom and dad, and sleep an hour or two, and chase girls for 2 days. And then we'd repeat the episode, drive back to Southern California. Nevada didn't have a speed limit in those days. It was whatever was comfortable and you felt reasonably safe with. So we drove, changing drivers. We drove through the night. A lot of the time, the speedometer would only go to 110, and we put it on the peg most of the time. And we would have some exciting experiences. One time the driver went to sleep, and I screamed, and he woke up, and we got through that one. Another time we were flying down the highway, and we discovered that there were horses along the edge of the highway. That's where the grass was, and they were wild horses out there on the range. And we went through the herd without touching one. We had been told before that if you hit a horse or a cow on those highways in Nevada at that time, that they would come through the windshield. And so we were tried to be watchful, but we didn't slow down much until we saw them. Anyway, those were exciting times.
Yeah, man, oh man, that you have got some great stories there. You know, the other thing was in 1970, you mentioned that God called you and your wife to go into Christian ministry as pastors, but at the time you had your own successful farm, you had a dairy herd. What made you decide to give all of that up and then move to Colorado, go to Bible college for training?
Well, pastor has to lay his foundation a little bit for what led up to this situation. When my first wife and I got married, neither one of us knew anything about God and religion. But when she was about 26, long story, I'll shorten here, but she went to church and had what they would call a born again experience. She was a redhead and believed that redheads had to have a fierce temper, and she did. She was beautiful, but she had a temper. One day she came home and said, "I got saved today." Billy Graham talks about this all the time, and I worked with Billy Graham through one of his crusades, but later on. But I said, "You got saved? Saved from what?" And she said, well, and she tried to explain it to me. She was brand new to it. She didn't know as much about God as I did, which was almost zero.
Mm.
And anyway, I saw her life change, and she introduced me to these people that were in the church, fabulous church. Wasn't big, but it was powerful move of God there. And 2.5 years after she became a Christian, I became a believer. One day I smoked a little, drank a little, and swore a lot. And the next day, after I had said, I believe in Jesus as Lord, because she had introduced me to him over a period of 2.5 years. And my life changed. And I had what you call a new birth. It was as if I started out a whole new life. And one day I did all that stuff, and I didn't know anything. I was dumb. Let's put it that way. However, I had been a valedictorian in school, so I knew what I wasn't ignorant. I just didn't know anything. But when I had that new experience, the dog treated me better. The cows were better. And during that period of time, I got to the place I was twice awarded the best dairy farmer in the state of Idaho, 2 years in a row, received a plaque from Kraft Foods. I had grand champion bull at the Cow Palace in San Francisco, which is the biggest show west of the Mississippi, in 1965, and sold that bull, negotiated a price. The co-owner and myself decided, well, we think $25,000 to send him into artificial service, pretty good price. So I was designated to negotiate with the potential artificial insemination. That was the old AI. And I said, the guy from the company said, how much do you want for the bull? I said, I don't know. What do you offer? He said, well, we think 25,000 is a pretty good price. I said, ooh, that's where he wants to start? Okay. I sold the bull for 40,000.
Wow.
And that having a high quality herd of cows was a situation where I had 2 years prior to my call to go into service or into pastoral service. 2 years in a row, I had the highest producing herd in the state of Idaho. And one of those, when I sold out at go into ministry, one of those went to California and became a state record holder in California, where they had tens of thousands of cows. So anyway, that's where I was when God called me to ministry. One evening, I was reading in the book of Titus, which I'd never read before, and I read in verses, I think 6 through 9, it listed the qualifications of a minister. And I had thought about going into ministry, but I was on top of my game. And it seemed ridiculous at 38 years of age to even consider. Well, the minute I finished reading the qualifications of a minister, I heard a voice right in here, says, that's you. I took a deep breath and I read it again, and I heard a voice, that's you. I did it again. I got it third time. When I heard that third one, the phone rang. The man that owned the property next to me was a wealthy Jewish man. And he said, hey, Mr. Lane, I know that you know all about everything around your neighborhood, which I knew a lot. But he says, I have a friend out of state who would like to buy a farm somewhere close to mine, and his was across the fence from me. And he had a manager, he had a big dairy. I had sold him bulls. I was well acquainted with him. Mm-hmm. And he said, do you know anybody that has a farm for sale? I said, I sure do. We talked and negotiated and set a price for the farm that night. During the night, I thought about, what am I going to do now? I've got a herd of cows. Well, I'd been president of the Idaho State Holstein Association and familiar with auction sales. I loved auction sales. I can still do a little auctioning. And the idea came, I'll have a sale and I'll sell these cattle and make big money. I'll have cash on hand. Well, I came in for breakfast the next morning, and the phone rang before I could sit down. And a dairy farmer that I had been selling cattle that didn't quite fit with my standard, he called me. He wanted to talk about some dairy business we had going on. And I said, well, Jerry, I have kind of good news and bad news. God has called me to go into ministry, and I'm going to be selling my cows, so I'm not going to be doing this with you anymore. He said, wonderful. God's called you into ministry. Well, interesting enough, the Jewish man had said the same thing the night before. Said, what denomination? And I said, Nazarene. And he said, oh, he knew a Nazarene by the name of Nigerian that had been in his home. And I keep backing up because I can't keep up with where I've been and done. But anyway, two people had told me how wonderful it was that I was called to go into ministry, including another call from a pastor in another denomination the night before. Anyway, with Jerry, I said, oh, I'm just not going to be in business. He says, hey, I just built a corral, big corral. I know your herd. Will you sell it to me? I said, oh, I've been selling him cows on basis of they produce milk, he sells the milk, pays off the cow with the money. He says, I can do the same thing with the whole registered herd. He says, I know what you got the good stuff. And I could not say no. I wanted to say no, but I couldn't do it. And I finally agreed with him to sell him the cows. So from one evening to before breakfast the next morning, I had sold the farm and the cows. And I was on my way, and I'd heard about this Nazarene Bible College, which is a new entity. And so I found out then from my wife that God had called her a couple of weeks before he called me. I didn't know about that, but when we talked about it and decided we got to go to Bible college. So that's how we got to that.
Wow. That's amazing. That's just incredible. And I mean, you left college to be pastors, and you were pastors at 6 different churches over the years. I mean, that's a lot. And I guess I'm wondering, as somebody who has been a pastor at all these different churches, how do you know if you were actually successful in building the ministry?
Well, there's a basic thing that is said. When a pastor leaves a church, does he leave it in better condition than it was when he arrived? Now, every church, in some regards, is a business, and it has to do certain things to survive and do good. And so when we went to Los Alamos, there's a long story about that invitation to go there to pastor. And everybody knows about Los Alamos, where the bomb was made.
Mm-hmm.
The bomb. And we went there, and they needed a pastor because they just built a new building. They'd gotten started. This was a new start church, had a new building, but they had a little bit of a problem. There were people who wanted to put a blue carpet in and some who wanted a brown carpet. And they were way apart for a little bit. We went there, we were there for 6 years. And when we left, they were in pretty good condition. One of the doctors, everybody's a doctor there, practically a PhD. Mm-hmm. One of the doctors, I told him one day, I said, I'm a little intimidated by all the degrees that are walking around here and sitting in the pews. And I said, I'm a little intimidated. He said, oh, Pastor, don't worry about that. He said, we know a lot about quantum physics and little tiny things. We know a lot about chemistry. What we are interested in is knowing our Creator God better. I said, I can help you. And so when we left that church, it was a church full of people who believed strongly in God. And each one of the churches we went to, we thought about it after we'd been to all of these, that we were kind of fix-it pastors. Come in and there was something that they were struggling with, And when we left, they were better off than we'd been when we got there.
Got it.
So
That's how you know. All right, very good. That makes total sense to me. I think that's true for just about any organization, right? So I think that's wonderful. I mean, you've had several near-death experiences over time. I'm talking about drownings, car wrecks, bullets whizzing by your head, and you were describing what it sounds like when a bullet whizzes by your head. You were gored by a bull, overturned tractors on the farm, even being pulled out of a stalled plane at low altitude. How do you explain all of this that you lived through all of this?
I got a picture here. I don't know if I can show you.
Yeah, I see it.
There's a picture of a car there.
Yeah.
That's the car that I was in 1953 when we rolled at 80 miles an hour.
Oh,
I wasn't driving, but the guy that was driving never turned his lights on bright at all. He just, for some reason, didn't. Well, we were on a little trip and he was driving 80 and there was a construction zone and we saw it too late to avoid it. And he turned the wheel and we went off the edge of the road that happened to be level around there. And we think we rolled 7 times.
oh,
So that was the first of 3 car wrecks. And I can tell you what it's like to be under a bull and you're looking up and his eyes are right about here, about here. I don't know how to move my hands around. And anyway, I was foolish. I'd gotten in the pen with the bull to lead him around and show him off for a visitor when the bull had won a blue ribbon at a show. And I was showing him off a little bit. And the bull decided that he was going to control me. So he just pulled his head down and pretty quick he's on top of me.
oh,
All of these experiences happened. I was keeping track through the years and I never thought much about how many there were, but right now there's around 15 near-death experiences. And the question has often been asked, how do you figure out that?
yeah,
Well, I can only give God the credit for saving me through all of those. He wasn't done with me yet,
yeah,
which is a kind of a common cliche, but I think it's true in my case.
yeah,
The hearing a bullet go by your ear is, of course, pretty current. I thought right now, only it didn't go by Trump's ear, it took part of the ear.
right.
But I don't know how close you have to be to hear the bullet when it misses, but I would suspect it was in an inch or so. And it went right by here.
Oh my gosh.
And I was out deer hunting, which was common every fall. I went deer hunting. I shot a deer or an elk or an antelope every year for 13 years.
Hmm.
And I was a pretty good marksman. And I was in the brush and somebody just shot at movement from across the gully. Well, I had a telescope sight and a 270 rifle, and I took a good look at the guy. And I contemplated notching his ear. I really did contemplate it. But fortunately, I realized I might miss by a half inch one way or the other, and I didn't want to kill the guy.
Mhm.
So that was those are some of those kind of episodes.
Wow, unbelievable. You've definitely lived a full life here. I want to talk about your book. The name of the book is called Conceivable: The Unlimited Potential of the Unborn. Tell our audience what made you want to write this book called Conceivable. Why'd you write it?
All right. Last year, I was in a meeting and there was a state official was asked what he thought about the Roe versus Wade decision.
Hmm.
And his comment was, he says, I hope people will come to their senses and reverse that event. Well, it was in a time of having questions and answers, and I couldn't help it. My hand shot up and I spent about 5 minutes telling him why it was important that people not abort the babies. And the subtitle of the book is one that my son-in-law gave me, The Unlimited Potential of the Unborn. Oh my, I have pretty much become a spokesman, I think, to let people know that the item that's in your stomach isn't just a blob of blood from the hours after the egg and the sperm get together. That is a living thing. It's dividing, it's growing. There's hundreds of thousands of cells that are showing up, and they know where to go. Your left eye knows where to get the cells come from, and your right toe. They're all in a bundle to start with, and DNA has described how this happens. And we've known for almost 100 years about DNA that explains how a human being comes to be. When I was first in college, Darwin was the darling of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I heard 3 scientists ask what Darwin meant to science through the years. They said, well, when we back up and look at it, right now, the only thing we know about Darwin is that he was wrong on everything that the Darwinian evolution had. So that was, anyway, that's part of that story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate everything that you've shared here today. You've certainly given us something to think about. There's no question about that. You know, what I like is good food. And I know over the years, you've had some good food in your day, especially all the different places that you've been able to live. You know, I just think about some of the great meals you must have had over the years. What's your favorite meal? What do you like to eat?
Well, it's finding favorite really started in New Mexico. I like chili rellenos.
Oh,
I
very
like
nice.
enchiladas. I like huevos ranchero. I like tacos. I like tostados. And being born in Idaho, I love baked potatoes. Good meal. They're all wrapped up right there.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I meant to tell you the other day that I had something that was pretty good here where I live now, where I have 8 restaurants. Uh, I had a Maryland crab cake.
Oh yeah, that's really
It
good.
probably wouldn't measure up to your standards, but it was good.
Yeah, see, I mean, I'm a New Yorker where I was born in Manhattan and had access to some really good seafood over there and lived on Long Island for a long time. So right by the water. And so yeah, some of the crab cakes that we had out there, even as a kid, I used to go and visit Maryland and I had a family relative that would take us out on a little boat in Maryland and we would go for crabs and he would set down the traps at the bottom of the water. We would pick them up and then we would eat the crabs that same day. I mean, it couldn't get any fresher because I literally picked up the crab from a trap and then later that evening was eating it in a crab cake. And I got to tell you, I mean, some of the best crabs ever I had in Maryland. Now I live in Nashville, Tennessee, so we're landlocked and I can't really get access to fresh crabs. So I miss it.
Uh, oh, I did the same thing with crabs. My mother had an uncle that lived on the West Coast,
Yeah.
and we went there one time and did the same thing. Got fresh crab and had this picnic on the beach.
Oh yeah, there's nothing better than that.
It was good.
Nothing better. All right, so if our listeners, if they want to go and buy your book, it's called Conceivable, the Unlimited Potential of the Unborn. Where can they go to pick up that book?
Well, anywhere you can think of. Amazon has a tremendous production of what it looks like. It tells a little bit about it. And you can read the first 7 pages in the advertisement that Amazon has. But you can buy it just about any place. You can buy it through Walmart. You can order it there. You'll have to pick it up, but because they don't have it in the store, which my aim would be to get it in their store eventually. It's important that every voter in America understand that this unborn thing, they don't call it a baby, they don't want to, until it's sometime after human birth, but it's a living organism from day one.
Yeah, well, listen, I appreciate you sharing that perspective. I think it's certainly something for our listeners to consider as they go into the voting booth and they figure out, the direction of the country. I think it's an important issue that needs to be spoken about, and certainly I want to hear all sides of it. And you've lived a compelling life. You've done a lot of really great things in your life, and a lot of that wouldn't have happened, right? Had your mother
none of it
decided.
would. Oh, we didn't even talk about my grandson, who was now working as a lead study in research for a London firm. He lives in Montana, works for a London firm. He's a top graduate of Colorado School of Mines and a computer engineer. He's in the same category brain-wise as some old guy named Einstein. He really would fit with that kind of brain. And anyway, life is so good for me. There's a lot more I could tell you. I've given you the brief version. This book is only about a 3 or 4 hour read if you're a quick reader. Yeah. It's a number of people have told me, hey, I read it in one sitting. I got in bed one evening and picked it up and couldn't put it down until I finished it. And person after person have said, this is so inspiring and everybody needs to get this. Several people have ordered 10 copies to send to friends and neighbors and gifts for people. So thank you for allowing me to share what we have.
Of course, Pastor. Of course, Pastor Ray Lane, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story. Thank you for sharing your book. Our audience can go onto Amazon and pick that up. And what can I say? I think it's wonderful that you were on the show today. I'm glad that our paths crossed, and I'm glad that you were on the show. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the week ahead.
Thank you.
All right. And to our audience, if you like this conversation with Pastor Ray Lane, I want you to like it and share it with other friends. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.